My name is Ernie Humphrey. I'm the Vice President of Educational Programs for Performernet, the online community for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar this morning, The Essentials of Resumes and Interviewing in Today's Job Market. Your resume still represents a key that can open or close many doors. Today we will discuss how ideal resumes have evolved over the past few years in this new world of social media, the key items to include on your resume, the red flags to avoid in your resume. We will also offer an overview of best practices in making the most of interview opportunities and set the stage for our career webinar next week, which will focus squarely on converting interviews into job offers. A quick note on today's agenda. First, we'll hear a presentation from our featured speaker, Moshe Kravitz, and then we'll move into our interactive Q&A session where we'll spend the remainder of our hour. We would like this to be an interactive experience for you, so if you have any questions at any time, please go to the questions area in your GoToWebinar control panel and send us your questions. We can't promise to get all of them in, but we will do our best, and we'll follow up afterwards with any questions we did not get to today. A few more logistical notes about the webinar. A link to today's presentation and video of the webinar will be sent out to all attendees within 24 hours of the event and will be posted on Performernet.com. Those who would like CPE credits through NASBA will need to answer all the polling questions during the event and should have pre-registered for CPE credit on the way into the registration process. For any questions regarding CPE credits, please contact Chris Brower at cbrower@performative.com. We'll have Chris's contact information up later in the event for you, so don't worry if you didn't catch that just now. You will be asked to complete a short survey regarding the webinar. We greatly appreciate your feedback regarding our event today, as we always strive to improve the ROI we offer our attendees for your valuable time. A quick word about Performernet. Performernet is the largest and fastest growing online community and resource for senior level corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. Performernet connects corporate finance leaders to provide instant advice and insights on the tough financial and strategic challenges they face every day. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Moshe Kravitz, Certified 5 O'Clock Club Career Coach. Moshe guides his clients in selecting appropriate targets and in marketing themselves effectively. His expertise includes many years as an educator, actuarial positions at CNA Insurance and Buck Consultants, and his position as Director of Financial and Planning Analysis at a major telecommunications industry company. Everywhere he works, Moshe demonstrates passion for helping each other to improve their skills and efficiency. With this passion, he helps job seekers to hone their job skills, enabling them to land offers more quickly and at higher salaries. With that, it's my pleasure to hand the floor over to Moshe, and we'll be right on the Wall Street Journal slide. Moshe.
Okay, thanks, Ernie, and welcome to everybody who's joined us today. I hope that you enjoy and derive benefit from our presentation. A few years ago, the Wall Street Journal was planning to do an article to explain and show their readers why it was so difficult for very qualified professionals to find a job in the current economy, the current job market. And they had planned it out very well. Wall Street Journal had selected a very qualified candidate, professional candidate, Beth, who'd been working seriously for a full year trying to find a job with no success. The journal also engaged several national career coaching organizations to interview and work with Beth to discover and be able to convey to the readers exactly what was the nature of these difficulties, hoping, I guess, that that would enable job seekers to address and overcome the challenges. Well, one of these national career coach organizations asked Beth, could you please see your resume? They worked with her to revise the resume, and within a few weeks, Beth had a job, and the Wall Street Journal had no article. So a resume can definitely be a key to open those important doors which could lead to a job offer. Is the resume the only way to open those doors? Definitely not. As we could see from the experience of William Cohn. William Cohn is today known as an author, a management consultant, a professor, among other things. Early in his career, he's a disciple of Peter Drucker. He was from the first graduates of Peter Drucker's first management doctorate program at what later became known as Claremont University in California. Early in his career, William Cohn did a market test. He mailed out resumes to quite a few target companies that he was applying to, and he mailed an equal number of what he calls a sales letter. I like to call it a summary statement. And as he reports in one of his books, that the sales letters did far better in opening the doors to get invitations to interview than the resume did. So it's a tried and proven approach, if you like. A resume is not the only way to open the door. I've recommended to various clients, for various reasons, to use a summary statement in place of a resume, or to at least try both, like Bill Cohn did, mail some resumes and some summary statements, and see what works. As a general rule, there are no black and white rules in this game of job searching. Yeah? If it works for you, use that technique. If you find that it's not successful, something else is more successful, put your weight, put your time and effort more to the technique which you see is working. So this is something you could test out. Meanwhile, I would recommend a summary statement to one client whose chronology maybe has a lot of gaps, whose experience maybe is a bit thin, and by condensing everything into a summary statement, the potential employer will see skills, accomplishments, and all packed together, and that could drive interest in speaking to this candidate. On the other hand, I've recommended to a very, very qualified candidate with a tremendous amount of accomplishments, experience, too much to encompass in a resume. And I suggested that he use a summary statement, and you'll see it on the next slide. Here's a sample summary statement, which the client agreed that I could use if I sanitize it and change the name, the dates, the places, etc. It's small print, you may not have time to read through the whole thing, but even the first two sections over here, at AAA, that section alone could be used as a summary statement to send to a potential employer. It gives you a sense of what this candidate is about. They find themselves interested, and they call them in to speak further. Now, knocking on the door and hoping that they open up is the traditional way of applying for a position. Your resume is the key to try to get them to open up. Nowadays, there's another approach where, without knocking on their door, they come to you, right? That is, of course, if you have a profile on LinkedIn, where a potential employer can go and search and hand-pick the candidates whom he wants to meet with, and he'll come, open his door, and invite you in. I know of one hiring manager. He hires many hires per year, and for years already, he has not looked at resumes. He goes to LinkedIn and selects his candidates. Now, to be privy to such a selection, you maximize the likelihood of being noticed and chosen if you have a robust profile on LinkedIn. And I've put here a few points that you can do to make that profile robust. And I'll mention to you that I wanted to put a screenshot for a sample of a good, robust, compelling LinkedIn profile so you could see one on this webinar. But I looked and looked, and I didn't find one. Some of the profiles may have been strong in one section, not the other. Anyway, these are the components of a strong, compelling profile on LinkedIn. First off, you have an opportunity to make a headline, just like the New York Times puts big letters on a headline that everybody will notice. There's a profile headline. use it to convey your primary strength. They'll see who you are and what you do at a glance. Next, you have an opportunity to customize your URL. I saw one recruiter who customized the URL, and it read the name, first name, last name, phone number. That was the URL for this recruiter. Probably very effective. So use every opportunity you have over here in your LinkedIn profile to convey essential and compelling information. The most important section to use is the next one, which they title summary section. Some professionals skip it. They don't put anything there, and they go straight to listing their job chronology, their accomplishments. But this summary section is the gist. It's the essence of your LinkedIn profile, as it will be on your resume, as we'll see in a little while. And the format and content that you use to populate this summary section, we call it here the PDA format and content, which we'll be speaking about soon in this webinar. Now, in the past, a portfolio was used by artists, graphic artists, painters, to show their work. Today, on LinkedIn, a CFO can have a profile of his accomplishments, of his work, challenges that he's met, projects that he's led. Of course, being sensitive to things that shouldn't be made public, information that shouldn't be made publicly accessible. But you have options over here within LinkedIn to put links, to attach apps, and show the public, show a potential employer a lot more than you could show him on a resume even. Recommendations, although this will not take up much of the real estate, much of the space on your LinkedIn profile, it's important. It can be very compelling. And where do you get these recommendations? Many people, in the course of their daily work, receive once in a while a comment, even a passing comment from an associate, a colleague, an internal client, external client. Joe thinks that was a great job. Boy, you really turned that around fast. The results were exceeded expectations. Ask, George, would you mind to put that in an email and shoot it over to me? And keep those things on record, because you never know when you could take an excerpt from that and include it at the bottom of a resume, or ask him even to put it as a LinkedIn recommendation. Another thing one could do to increase his exposure on LinkedIn, more people will find you there and will identify you with the skill set, which is your strength, is by joining groups which are in your specific areas of interest. A number of times I've been contacted by somebody. I asked, where'd you find me? Oh, this LinkedIn group. People who are looking for candidates or consultants, or many reasons why they might be looking, will go to the groups, interest groups, which are likely to have people with the skill sets that that person is looking for. And it especially enhances your profile there if you participate in discussions on those groups. So you're much more likely to be found and contacted. And finally, on the page over here, if your company has a public profile, post that within your LinkedIn profile, because that will add context and credibility to yourself as a candidate if they can see the significance of the company where you're currently employed. So those are some of the things that a person can do to have a robust profile on LinkedIn, so that the door will open without you even knowing which door to have to knock on. Now, as we go on, we see and come back to this theme that the resume is a key to open appropriate doors. People may have had an experience of going to the hardware store and asking for a key to be made, only to go home and try it out and find that it doesn't work. The door remains locked. The key will only open that door which it was made exactly to fit. So the question is, how do you fit your resume to that door which you wish to open. That'll be the focus of today's webinar. Meanwhile, we'll mention that a resume will serve an additional purpose once the door has been opened and you've been invited to come for an interview. The resume will serve as a springboard for discussion at the interview. Now, I mentioned this right here to enable a person to hold back. It's not necessary to pour out all your experience, all the information about you, everything you've done, every job function that you've done. Not necessary. It's important to have the main talking points on the resume. Number one, it should work as a key to open the door. Number two, as a springboard. Once you're there, they say, oh, I see this accomplishment. Tell me more about it. That's what you want to do with the resume. The additional detail you'll be happy to convey once prompted, once you're asked for it at the interview. So some of the things that a resume is not, it's not a complete autobiography. It's not a complete employment history. It's not a list of job descriptions. If it would be, it would be too long and too boring and too hard to read. And since you want it to be read, hold back on the information that you're including there in order that the things which you put there will be read. While we're on the do nots, we mentioned a few other things to avoid. Avoid typos and grammatical mistakes. Now, some of you may be sitting there saying, I don't make typos. I don't make grammatical mistakes. I'm very good in grammar. I got an A in grammar. Okay? You don't have to be bad in grammar to make grammatical mistakes and typos. The software nowadays will do it for you. And I'll show you an example of that later on. Meanwhile, I'll mention to you that this week somebody told me an incident which occurred to him. He was one of 2 finalists for a job at a significant company. He found this out through inside information. The other candidate was much better qualified than he was. However, the other candidate was eliminated after writing a thank you letter as a follow-up to the interview, and that follow-up letter had grammatical mistakes. It's a shame to waste an opportunity where you might be a very qualified candidate, a great fit for the company, based on trivial stuff that could easily be avoided if you're aware and careful to make sure that no typos or mistakes have crept in. I fixed a few mistakes in this PowerPoint presentation, and the software put them back. We had to be vigilant and make sure that the fix remained. So be vigilant. Don't lose an opportunity for a trivial reason. Another thing is that make sure that your contact information is complete and easily found on the resume. But don't do like you sometimes see, a New York Times headline, name, address, phone number. This is the prime real estate on your resume. Don't fill it up with your name, rank, and serial number. It can be small and not bold as long as it's easy to find and it's complete, so they can contact you when they need to. And we've been discussing things, information to hold back in order to avoid overcrowding your resume. I get resumes that I have to force myself to look at it to read it because it's so packed. And even if it's well organized, the print is small and it's so much stuffed in over there, it's hard to read. And you want your resume to be read. So do yourself a favor, avoid overcrowding. Gaps in employment. It's a big topic. We're just touching on it now since we're mentioning things to avoid. If there are small gaps, they could easily be avoided by leaving out the months when you record your employment dates. Only use the years, and you gloss right over the gap, and it's not even an issue. If the gaps are bigger, so some people like to use a functional resume as opposed to a chronological resume. That's one way of avoiding the gaps. Each person in your own situation, think sometimes creatively what's an appropriate way to avoid the gap, but you don't necessarily in a resume want to go advertise big gaps. In terms of answering once, and if the gap is noticed, don't make a big issue of it. Have a plausible, valid, acceptable reason, state it, and go farther. That's all you need to do. They're not interested in a long saga, why and why and why. A simple answer, plausible, and go farther, discuss the job. Okay. The resume is a marketing tool. Now, marketing in the old days, in the 1950s, yeah?
Moshe, sorry to interrupt here. I apologize. At this point, we're going to go ahead and launch our first set of polling questions, if that's okay.
All right, good.
I'll hand the floor over to you. For those of you in the audience, we'd love to have your answer to our polling questions. For those of you in the audience for CPE credit, we'll need you to go ahead and answer each and every polling question. I'm going to go ahead and launch 2 polling questions. I'm going to leave each of these polling questions up for a minute or so. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our first question, which is obviously focused on resumes. So to Moshe's point, he was giving us some great information, how resumes are concise, but that doesn't necessarily mean that folks have made the evolution from what used to be 2 pages or more resumes to make that more of a focus, more of that value proposition statement. So we thought it might be interesting to gather some benchmarking information here and see what is the current state of the union of our folks on the webinar today. And then if we have time later on, and during the Q&A session, I will bring up the polling results, and we will go ahead and have Moshe comment on those. And then we'll give ourselves about 20 seconds or so. I just want to remind everyone, as we have polling questions up, that if you have questions at any time, please enter those in the questions area in your control panel. And like I said, we will have a Q&A session, and we'll do our best to go ahead and get those taken care of for us. So I'm going to give this one about 5 more seconds, and I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll here, and then I'm going to go ahead and launch our next poll. And this is more on the interview side, which will give us a preview here, I think. Oh, there we go. Let's try that one. Okay, go ahead and launch our polling question, which is related to resumes. How often do you update your resume? So I think we'll be touching on this as well. So, so how active are you in keeping your resume up to date? I think this will provide us some very interesting information here, on that side of it to see, what is it that people are doing and how often are they doing it? And I'm sure Moshe will touch on this as well. So we've got different frequencies here, monthly, a year, every few years, and then some people who are gainfully employed. On some level. In this situation, if you're gainfully employed, sometimes you don't spend as much time keeping that resume up to date, and you always need to be ready, and it should be up to date. You never know when an opportunity is going to come along or if you're going to have that transition. So I'll leave this open for about 5 more seconds, then we'll go ahead and close that poll. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And with that, I'd like to hand the floor back over to Moshe. Moshe?
Okay. Thanks, Ernie. That was good timing. As we begin now discussing the resume as a marketing tool. In the 50s, Westinghouse made a washing machine, and they sold it to everybody. They used national marketing, print, TV, and this was the washing machine, and you bought it, and that was it. That was, let's say, like the culmination of the Industrial Revolution, where mass production enables production of many, many pieces. You market that piece that you've produced to the whole world, and they buy it. Today, in 2012, Moshe Kravitz goes and visits Amazon.com, and I don't know if it takes 2 seconds, maybe milliseconds, but as soon as I'm there, it says, oh, people who viewed that also viewed this and this and this. There's 6 more things that they're trying to cross-sell. This is not mass marketing. They've got my number. This is customer customer-centric marketing. A resume as a marketing tool, also in the old days, was a mass marketing tool. You'd go have your resume typed, and you'd go and have it offset, print up 100, 200 copies, and that was it, and you sent it out to everybody. And today, you have it on your PC or on your tablet, and you tweak it for every single place where you want to send it out. Now, we're coming to say that if a resume is a marketing tool, and it's a customer-centric marketing tool, tweaking the resume should be much more than just changing the address where you're sending it to. It means changing perhaps the accomplishments that you include, changing perhaps the way that you define your positioning statement, what your name is, what your title is, what your function is, changing perhaps which items you decide to emphasize based on the needs of this particular target company to which you're sending the resume. That is the beginning of a customer-centric resume. An employer wants to answer 3 questions. He wants to know, first of all, can you do the job? Do you have the skills and the interest, desire, the motivation to do the job for him? So your resume should be addressing that and showing that you can do what this hiring manager needs. And to do that, you have to know what this hiring manager needs. How do you know? Through research. One initial level of research is look on the job site, look on the job posting, and see what's being requested, what skills, what background, what experience is being requested, and before finalizing your resume, make sure that you look there and include in your resume all the stuff that they're asking for. If you have it, don't make up stuff. It's never worthwhile to lie on a resume, to make up stuff. Besides ethics, practically speaking, it comes back to haunt you. And even people who've been hired and then discovered are out in the streets, and they're worse off than they were to begin with. So ethics-wise, practical-wise, don't make up stuff. Can you stretch stuff? Can you exaggerate stuff? Yes and no. I'll give you a personal example. I had accomplished a small accomplishment at a certain company where I'd worked, and a resume writer blew it up into a major thing. And I took issue with that. I said, it's misleading. It's this after he said it's not. Because that skill that you used in achieving that accomplishment, which was small in magnitude just because of the context, that skill is important to a potential employer because that skill could be used in much more significant ways. And he was right. And it was true. I've used that skill many times in more significant ways. So emphasizing something which you did is not necessarily misleading. I'm not telling you it's always not misleading. You have to use your judgment, use your integrity. But emphasizing something is not necessarily misleading. But don't make up stuff. But to the extent that you can, cull from all your experience and accomplishments and use that to show, yes, you can satisfy what this employer needs. Other questions he wants to satisfy is, will you fit into the culture, and will he like working with you? I don't know necessarily that the resume will show that. The interview definitely will speak to that more, but I put it here because we're listing those 3 types of questions that a potential employer wants to answer. Now, the structure of your resume, to build it to best portray the skills, the talents that you have to offer, and show how they fit the needs of this particular employer, I like to call this structure a PDA file. Positioning yourself, differentiating yourself, and quantifying your accomplishments. Now, a positioning statement could be very, very simple. A guy driving next to me on the highway was driving a little truck, and it said professional handyman. That's a positioning statement. I know exactly what he does, and more or less at what level he works and how much he's worth. If a guy had on there dentist, chiropractor, I'd know more or less the same thing, what he does, at what level. If he has on his truck CFO, or on his resume CFO, is that a positioning statement? I don't think so, because I don't know enough yet. I don't know the context. Well, what does he do at what level? Is he CFO of a $1 million revenue company or $1 billion a year company? Yeah. Is his strength towards accounting, towards strategy, towards restructuring, towards pulling out a company that's going down? Where's his strength? And so you need to put enough information that I know. What do you do and at what level? That's a positioning statement. In terms of reflecting, we've touched on this, in terms of using your resume to reflect the needs of that specific employer, there's a great story about a very well-known orator who always had an appropriate analogy for anything that he was speaking about. And they once asked him, how is it that you always have such an appropriate analogy? He says, I'll give you an analogy. There was an archer who always shot bullseyes. They asked him, how do you do that? He said, it's very simple. I shoot the arrow, and it hits, and then I draw the target around the arrow. So he draws it with the bullseye in the middle. So when you're shooting for a certain company, aiming your resume to that company, go to that company and see what they need, and then draw the target around the arrow by finalizing, revising your resume so that it reflects your skills that you really have, which that employer needs. Now, we mentioned the real estate. The most important, most noticed portion of your resume is the top third. Use that to the hilt. That's where the glance falls, and that's where you put an entire PDA format, your positioning statement, your differentiating, your accomplishment, at least one, should be right there on the top. That'll grab his interest. And the rest is backup to support what you've stated over there. We've discussed a bit about what's a positioning statement. How do you differentiate yourself? After you have established yourself by stating your position, he sees, okay, here's a person who can do what we need. But why should I take him? I have 100, I have 1,000 apparently qualified candidates. Why should I look at you? You want to differentiate yourself, and here's why you should look at me. That differentiation also is based on your skills, your qualifications, and the needs of that employer. Let's say he's a CFO, and he's applying to be CFO at a pharmacy company, and he happens to have a master's degree in chemical engineering. Will that differentiate him from the competition for this pharmaceutical company? You bet it will. But that same qualification may not distinguish him in a different industry where that training is unimportant. So distinguish yourself based on your qualifications and the needs of the employer. That's customer-centric marketing. Now, you could use many things to differentiate yourself. You could use your experience, your accomplishments, your training, your natural skills, your education, whatever would seem to work and be of interest to this specific target, this specific employer. Okay, here's a few samples now. So it's not only theoretical, it's actual. You see it in practice. Here's a sample summary statement. Chief Financial Officer, that's not yet a positioning statement. But when he says what he does, specialize in turnaround and medium-sized companies, it's a positioning statement. I know what he does, at what level. And then we have here key functions, accomplishments, his areas of expertise and industries, and it's very readable, right? There's space, it's a nice size font, it'll be read. And I know what this guy's about. Here's another sample. The top section is his positioning statement. And already he's quantifying what he can. Manage staff 150, budget of $30 million, save $60 million. I think it makes the resume much more interesting and much more compelling with quantified accomplishments. Again, it's laid out nicely, it's easy to read, and you notice here, bold and underlined. Research has been done and shown that what grabs the reader's attention the most is when the item that you want to emphasize is bold and underlined. But use it selectively only to bring attention to those words, those phrases that you want to emphasize. Next. Here's a before version. The next page will show the after version. This is pretty good. Project manager, nuclear power department. That's a positioning statement. And he lists over here with active verbs, which that used to be the call to action for a good, compelling resume. Action verbs, responsible, conceived, assisted, interfaced, coordinated, performed, and he lists very significant accomplishments over here. Skills, education, nicely laid out, but this is still before. After a lot of work in numerous versions, he ended up with this as the summary statement at the top of his resume. Andrew Marks, power industry manager. You see bold, you see underlined, you see it's very readable, you see quantified accomplishments. First-year savings of $63 million. I would have bolded that. Managed projects up to $6 million. The top line is his positioning statement. Power industry manager, every area of power generation. Next, he's differentiating himself from most of the competition when he tells you that he ran a 1,000-megawatt power plant. How many in his industry have done that? There are not so many plants, etc. I think this is a compelling format, compelling content for the summary statement. The next page I put in here, not so much for you to see the content, but for you to see the format. This is the backup that he has below the summary statement, his experience. Many resumes that you see would have California Power Company, that's the company, with the address and the years that he worked there, big letters, bold. Not necessary. Who cares? It just has to be there. What should be bold? The job function, the accomplishments. That's what you want to bold because that's what's important. That's what you want them to see. Okay, let's touch on interviews. If a resume is today a tool for customer-centric marketing, how much more so is the interview the continuation and the epitome of customer-centric marketing? I'll tell you an incident with William Cohn much later in his career when he was managing marketing for the R&D division of McDonnell Douglas. Several hundred people in that division, mainly PhDs, and they would submit bids for research projects. He wanted to discover what is the biggest driver of success, which will determine that their bid should be accepted above those of the competitors. Was it beating them by price? Was it a better promise of technological innovation? Was it better on-time delivery? He studied an entire year's worth of bids which they submitted. In his industry, most of the clients were various government agencies. And the procedure was that you may or may not actually meet with representatives at the customer, the government agency. in the course of preparing the proposal and the bid for the development, research and development project. But after submitting the bid, communication was closed. Then you just sit there and hope that they take you. What he discovered was that price was not the driver. Innovation was not the driver. Next page. You see that the number of contacts with the customer in the time frame within which they were building and designing and modifying the proposition, that was a better predictor of success in winning contracts than price, than innovation. And he tells you why. Because through multiple contacts and discussions with the customer, they found out what the customer wanted and why, which enabled them to tweak, to modify the proposal to best meet the needs of that customer. Customer-centric marketing. Here's the citation where you can find his discussion of that project. And for Drucker fans, it's a great book. William Cohn was a student of Drucker, and he records in this book, in vivo, so to speak, classroom experience in which Drucker conveyed many of his famous concepts and lessons. Anyway, a resume also, an interview also, is exactly this process, going to find out what the customer wants and why. Next page shows you two typos, so to speak, which crept in when I prepared this PowerPoint, and I put them back here after fixing them a few times to make sure they stayed out. Can you notice and find two typos on this page? Give you a few seconds. Okay, the next page shows the two typos in bold and in red. Either the software made that E a capital letter because it's at the beginning of the line, but it should be small case. I mistyped and wrote the price bid of, as my finger just went, because of is a word that you always type. But I happened to notice that it should say or. Now, besides the fact that these two types of errors could occur inadvertently, also, they could be hard to notice because they both look normal. You scan your page, you see a capital letter at the beginning of the line, it looks normal. And bid of the technology, it also looks normal. So be careful in reviewing your document, have somebody else review it. Sometimes it helps by going from the bottom up and to catch and eliminate all the mistakes and keep them out. Okay, back to the interview. It's customer-centric. How do you make sure that your interview is and remains customer-centric so that you can find out what they need and why, and then show them that you've got it and you could give it to them? Go to the interview with this in mind, that the purpose of this interview is to get and to give information. It's a business meeting. You're exchanging information. Now, to find out what they need exactly and why could take effort, will take effort on your part. Yeah? Some companies might know very well what they need and be forthright in telling you. But I would not bank on that, because many companies, even if they know, will not be forthright in telling you. And many companies will not know. Some companies will think they know. So take it upon yourself as your responsibility to determine what does this company need, and then show them I can give it to you. Now, this begins long before you get there. It begins even before you send them your resume, because you do research on this company. Look at what they say about themselves. Look at what others say about them. Look on their website, look at press releases, and look for sure at their 10K, where they list factors influencing the industry, their company, challenges facing the industry and their company. And when you get there, you're prepared to ask about those challenges. What's your company doing to address those challenges? Is it working? Have you tried other things? Are there other things that you could try? Why didn't you try them? What's your competition doing? Is it working? Why don't you do that? You're asking intelligent questions. And this sounds like ABC, and it is. It's elementary. But if you do this, you will differentiate yourself from most other qualified candidates who don't bother to do this type of homework. You'll be showing initiative. You'll differentiate yourself from the crowd. And you'll be asking intelligent questions, and they'll say, this guy's on the mark. And you'll be able to ask the intelligent questions, which will help you to uncover what does this company need, so you can show them that I can do it. Now, once you've asked the question, listen carefully to the answer. Does it make sense? Does it fit? Does it fit in the context of what you've learned about their company, of what you know about the industry, of what you know from your own experience? Sometimes you, as the expert, might know better than they as to what they need. As Peter Drucker relates, in the old days when a guy was a manual worker, even a skilled manual worker, he was a bricklayer, 20 years experience, 30 years, he's a foreman, he's managing other bricklayers. He knows more because he's done it longer, and he has more experience, he's learned more, and he's directing the other guys how to do their work better. Today, with knowledge workers, it's upside down. Right? The CIO probably forgot how to program. Yeah? The guys working under him, a level 2, 3 levels down, they know the technical stuff much better than he knows. Right? If I'm coming in for an interview, they're hiring me because they want the skills that I bring, and I may be better able to discern what is the need and what might be the solution better than the person who's bringing me in. So listen carefully to what they're saying so that you can discern what do they need, and then finally demonstrate, not with talk, words. Demonstrate with your quantified accomplishments, those that you've put on the resume and those that there was no space on the resume, but you have them on your fingertips. Pull out the one which best illustrates how you can fulfill that task which they need done. Maybe you did it in a different context, in a different type of company, in a different industry. But so what? It's those skills that you've used again and again, and you can illustrate it with various accomplishments. How it's those skills that are your strong suit that you've used again and again, and for sure you could use them here in this capacity to help this company with what they need. Another important point about when you're interviewing is be sure to stay focused. You've come, you did your research, you did your preparation, you know several essential points about your own qualifications that you want to make sure to convey to this company while you're there. Write them down on a 3x5 card or on a whole page on a clipboard, and in case the conversation begins to get sidetracked and they ask you about your tennis game or about the presidential election or about maybe you're discussing important stuff about the organization where you're interviewing and the politics over there, make sure, speak somewhat, you have to be friendly, they want to know if they can work with you, but as soon as you can, bring the conversation back to the matter at hand, the job function at hand, the challenges that they need solved. Make sure you convey those points about your own qualifications that you need to convey, and that you get answers for the questions that you need to get answered to understand the needs of this company. I want to leave time for at least some QA, so we'll touch at least on the next 2 items. We have another webinar next week to expand upon it, but when you go away from this interview, don't go away without at least trying to get an answer to these 2 questions. Would you have any objections to hiring a person with my background? Hiring a person like myself? You don't have to say me, make it that personal, make it a little bit impersonal. Hiring a person with my background, etc. And people get nervous when they hear this. Oh, I don't want to raise any red flags, raise any objections. The objections are there. You're not raising them. They have them anyway. The only thing is, will you know about them and be able to respond to them or not? A quick story. A lady was being interviewed to be director of marketing, and they liked her skills. They liked her. They could work with her, great background. But they saw she was too laid back for this position, and she was able to uncover that objection. So she went home, prepared the proposal. I'd like to have another meeting with you, please. I'd like to show you this proposal. They invite her in. She wears a red dress. She sits at the front of her chair and leans forward, and she gets the job. So some objections you will be able to overcome, some not, but you can only overcome them if you know about them. Next, you want to know, how do you compare to the other employees, to the other candidates? And you only know if you ask. They may or may not tell you, but you may you only know if you ask. And if you're nervous or not confident that they'll answer you if you ask the question outright, you could break it up into small pieces. How would you describe the ideal candidate? How does my profile match against that ideal candidate? Do you have other candidates? Where are you in the hiring process? How do those candidates match against your ideal candidate, et cetera, et cetera? We'll discuss it more next time. Now, for a few minutes, I'd like to open to any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go ahead and launch our last polling question. While that's up, I'll go ahead and get our Q&A. Since we abbreviated time, we got a few minutes late. We apologize for that. Okay, our first question, Moshe, it is one that I've seen more than once on these career-related webinars. How do you suggest that someone convey that they're a culture fit or assess the culture at companies they're looking at?
Okay. Starting out, go early to the company and bring work and sit there and observe what's going on and speak to people. Ask them what's it like to work here, and how long have you been here, and try to observe the people in vivo in how they interact with each other, and speak to people at all levels, the receptionist and the analyst, people at all levels. Look at them interact, see how they interact, and that's one way to get information. Today, there's websites where you could go where they post comments that are placed by current or recent employees at an organization, and they also say what it's like over there. Also, in your direct conversations, in the course of the interview, you get a sense of how they're interacting with you. Ask about the organizational structure, who you'd be reporting to, who'd be reporting to you. Ask to speak with those people also, to meet with them, and get a feel of what it's like over there. But it's very, very important to do that homework, because oftentimes the fit, goodness of fit, will determine not only if you get the offer, but if you stay there.
Okay, great. Couple more. We have time for a few more questions. One of them is related to your first story on the Wall Street Journal. Can you share with us the identity of the person that story was about?
Yeah, sure. There's a note, in fact, on one of the slides. I didn't point it out, but the 5 o'clock club. Oh, it doesn't say 5 o'clock club. The slide with that the guy Andy, who I like very much. That series of resumes was done by the 5 o'clock club. The bottom of the slide says, I'll tell you in a second. Packaging Yourself, the Targeted Resume by Kate Wendelton. And if you Google that, Kate Wendelton, it brings up the 5 o'clock club. And that reference over there brings you to the details of how that resume was developed. They were the ones who interacted and fixed up the resume for that candidate.
Okay, great. I'll close the Q&A with a two-part question, and then we'll follow up afterwards with any questions we didn't get to. Still feel free to get your questions, and we'll follow up with Moshe afterwards if we couldn't get to the questions. One would be, first, on the resume side, what are the top 3 mistakes that you see and that you know of from your experiences that people still make in presenting their resume in today's world?
Not including quantified accomplishments, and overcrowding, and emphasizing the wrong things. Or in other words, failing to emphasize the main phrases and the main points that need to be seen on the resume.
Okay, great. Now, on the interview side, can you give us the top 2 or 3 things that you see people. I know we have more next week on interviewing, but just what are your thoughts there?
Being unprepared is one mistake, and never say anything negative, derogatory about anything, even if it's true, because the Joe will sit there and say, oh, that's how he talks about him. He'll talk next about me like that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. With that, we're going to go ahead and close the Q&A session. We'd like to sincerely thank Moshe for his time and insight. If you'd like us to connect you directly with Moshe, please indicate that on the survey. We will ask you to take immediately at the conclusion of our webinar. Moshe is an excellent source of information on today's topics. If you have any questions regarding the CPE credits, as we mentioned earlier, please contact Chris Brower at cbrower@performative.com. Again, I'd like to note, after we conclude the webinar, you'll be prompted to take a short survey. We really appreciate your feedback, as we're always trying to increase the ROI from the events that we offer. And as we mentioned a few times, I would like to invite everyone back next week for our career webinar, where Moshe will actually focus more on how you really nail that interview and get that job offer. Interviews are so hard to come by. You need to maximize each and every opportunity. So we're fortunate enough to have Moshe come back with us next week. With that, I'd like to wish everyone a great weekend, and I'd like to close the webinar, and I hope to see everyone on Performernet.com. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.